So our last example, we talked about the affinity chart, and in the affinity chart, it was really this kind of loose concept of I take post-it notes. It's very open. I write down ideas. Anyone can contribute an idea. Any idea is good for consideration. It gets people up out of their chairs, and there's not often a clear path or solution. And sometimes our best ideas come from there. But now I want to talk about kind of the exact opposite of that, the Pareto chart. And this has probably been used the longest. It got more formalized when we got into talking about Lean Six Sigma, which came from the manufacturing sector and has now been morphed into a whole lot of other sectors as well. I argue every sector. And the Pareto chart is used quite extensively. It's one of the most common chart types, and probably will be for a long time. It's clean, it's easy, but really, what is a Pareto chart? It's a bar chart, okay? And when we look at Lean Six Sigma, this isn't a Lean Six Sigma class, but there's a lot of it that kind of touches on that. And Lean Six Sigma says that 80% of our defects come from 20% of our inputs. Okay, that's just a rule of thumb. Is that always accurate? Of course it's not. But I've given you a couple examples of the Pareto chart in Canvas, so definitely be sure to look at those. And again, it's just simply a glorified bar chart that shows where incidents or where actions are occurring, if you will. So let me give you an example from my industry. When I worked for Cerner in the data center, we would many of us were on call, as if something would go wrong in the data center in the middle of the night and the team on site physically in the data center couldn't fix it. They called us and they asked us to investigate. Well, as time went on, we all kept getting woken up more and more and more. And we all loved our jobs, but also nobody likes to get awakened at 2 o'clock in the morning to fix a problem. So naturally, a lot of complaints ensued. Senior management kind of said, "Okay, what's going on here?" So they provided a Pareto chart to us that showed these are the reasons that we're calling out, our technical project executives in the middle of the night. So when we looked at the categories, the areas of these call outs, one of the resounding issues that it was getting the most traffic to our cell phones in the middle of the night was training databases that were running out of disk space. So the issue being that if something was wrong with the training database in the middle of the night when they were doing maintenance on it, that the nursing staff that was going to start training at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning couldn't start training. And suddenly I've got 50 nurses in a classroom that can't train, that the organization is now paying them overtime for a training environment that isn't functional. So we would get called in the middle of the night and say, well, the training domain is not functional. As we dissected it, many times we'd realize, well, it's not functional because you were migrating a bunch of files, the disk ran out of space. A very easy fix once you identify the problem. But it stood out on that Pareto chart that we could clearly see the bulk of our call outs are coming around training databases that are simply out of space. So the solution was fairly simplistic once we saw this Pareto chart in front of us. Was we need to be checking these training databases before we go home for the day. So guess what? That happens. We check the training databases before we leave for the day, and we see a dramatic reduction in call outs, okay, in the middle of the night. Naturally, everybody was happy about that, and it worked out really well. It also incentivized us to be sure we did check those databases, because if you didn't and you got a call in the middle of the night, many times it was your own fault. So that's the Pareto chart, like I said, used very often. And again, just remember, it's a fancy bar chart.